Do you remember when dinner wasn't always at the table, but right there in front of the television set? In the 1950s, families gathered around glowing screens with plates balanced on laps, tuning into their favorite shows while digging into hearty, comforting meals. These weren't fancy dishes, but they carried the flavor of home, of convenience, and of togetherness. Let's take a look back at 30 meals that fed America one TV tray at a time. Swanson's Turkey and Fixings. If you were an American family in 1953, chances are you first encountered the modern idea of dinner in front of the TV, thanks to Swanson's frozen turkey dinner. Before then, mealtime was a fairly formal affair. Table set, dad at the head, mom serving, and children expected to mind their manners. But when televisions marched into living rooms, they didn't just bring I Love Lucy and the Ed Sullivan Show. They brought with them a whole new way of eating. And Swanson was there with the perfect companion, the TV dinner. The story goes that Swanson had a massive surplus of frozen Thanksgiving turkeys, literally tons of it, and needed a way to use them up. Inspiration struck in the form of a compartmentalized aluminum tray, modeled after airline meals. Slide in slices of turkey with gravy, a mound of mashed potatoes, some cornbread stuffing, buttered peas, and a little dessert square. And suddenly you had a meal that could be baked in under half an hour. No pots, no pans, no fuss. For the first time, you could feed a family without so much as lifting a ladle. For parents, it was liberation. For kids, it felt like a novelty toy disguised as dinner. And for America, it marked the marriage of convenience, consumerism, and television culture. Eating Swanson's turkey and fixings while watching black and white comedy, it was about joining in a new national ritual where leisure began to matter just as much as nourishment. The TV dinner quickly grew from a marketing experiment into a cultural icon. By the mid-1950s, Swanson was selling millions each year, reshaping how Americans thought about mealtime. Women, especially, found relief in a product that freed them from hours of cooking and washing dishes, while advertisers proudly pitched it as modern living at its finest. To eat a TV dinner wasn't simply about filling your stomach. It was about buying into the promise of progress, a shiny aluminum tray that whispered, "The future is here." Of course, not everything aged gracefully. Those mashed potatoes could form a crust hard enough to chip a tooth, and the peas never quite tasted fresh. But nostalgia has a way of forgiving flaws. Today, people look back on Swanson's turkey and fixings not with criticism, but with fondness, remembering how a foil tray and a flickering screen turned mealtime into a little slice of mid-century magic. In a way, it wasn't just dinner, it was America learning how to relax. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes. If there was ever a dish that bridged the gap between the frugality of the Depression years and the optimism of post-war America, it was meatloaf with mashed potatoes.
Classic family meatloaf, here we go.
By the 1950s, families had moved into neat suburban homes, televisions glowed in the living room, and prosperity was on the rise. But the thrifty spirit of stretching a pound of ground beef into a full meal still lingered. Meatloaf was the perfect solution. Hearty, affordable, and endlessly adaptable. With the right mix of breadcrumbs, onions, ketchup, and seasonings, a single loaf could feed the whole family. And the addition of buttery mashed potatoes on the side made it feel downright indulgent. Cooking meatloaf was as straightforward as it was forgiving. Housewives, or occasionally their teenage children, could press the seasoned meat mixture into a loaf pan, slide it into the oven, and forget about it while catching the first act of the honeymooners. By the time the opening laugh track ended, the kitchen smelled of roasted beef and caramelized ketchup glaze. Meanwhile, potatoes simmered on the stovetop, ready to be whipped with butter and a splash of milk until smooth and creamy. It was the kind of dinner that filled bellies and quieted children, a reward at the end of a long school or work day. Emotionally, Meatloaf wasn't just dinner, it was stability in edible form. Families who had known wartime rationing and powdered eggs suddenly had meat and potatoes on the regular, and that signaled progress. Today, meatloaf carries a whiff of nostalgia, sometimes mocked as diner food or mom's old standby, but it has never truly disappeared. In fact, artisanal versions with gourmet glazes and truffle mash pop up in trendy restaurants. Back then, though, it was simpler. Slice of loaf, scoop of potatoes, TV tray, and laughter from the screen. Comfort didn't need more. Tuna noodle casserole.
I'm showing you how to make tuna casserole.
Few dishes scream mid-century America quite like tuna noodle casserole. That creamy, comforting concoction born of practicality and pantry staples. In the 1950s, canned tuna was the new miracle protein. Cheap, portable, and blessedly shelf-stable. Pair it with a bag of egg noodles and the ever-present can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, and you had a weeknight dinner that could stretch $1 and still feel like a proper meal. Add a scattering of peas, straight from the freezer bag or a tin, and a crunchy crown of potato chips or buttered breadcrumbs. And suddenly, you had not just sustenance, but something with a little pizzazz. Preparation was laughably simple, which was precisely the point. A mother juggling laundry, ironing, and the PTA could boil noodles, stir in tuna and soup, sprinkle on the topping, and slide the casserole into the oven without breaking a sweat. 30 minutes later, out came a bubbling golden dish, hearty enough to feed everyone gathered around the flickering glow of the Donna Reed show. It wasn't glamorous, but it was filling, and for a generation raised on thrift and eager for efficiency, that mattered far more than culinary flair. For many kids, tuna noodle casserole carried a special kind of nostalgia. The smell of it baking meant the house was warm, dinner was guaranteed, and there was something reassuring about the creamy, salty comfort waiting under that crunchy topping. Critics may joke that it was white belt cooking at its most uninspired, but there's no denying its cultural staying power. Today, the dish has been reimagined with fresh mushrooms, artisanal noodles, and line-caught tuna. But back then, nobody was fussing with upgrades. The magic of tuna noodle casserole was that it made humble ingredients feel like a full meal, perfect for eating off a TV tray with a side of laughter. Hot dogs and baked beans. Hot dogs and baked beans may not sound like fine dining today, but in the 1950s, they were the ultimate weeknight lifesaver. A combination that satisfied both budgets and appetites. With the rise of the supermarket, hot dogs became the everyman's meat, cheap, plentiful, and adored by kids who saw them as fun rather than frugal. Baked beans, often canned and flavored with brown sugar or molasses, rounded out the plate with sweetness and substance. Together, they made a meal that could be whipped up in minutes, freeing up parents to actually sit down and watch television alongside their children rather than hover in the kitchen. The preparation was so simple it barely counted as cooking, which was exactly why families loved it. Hot dogs could be boiled, fried in a skillet until crisp at the edges, or even baked in the oven if you wanted to feel fancy. The beans just needed to be poured from the can and warmed, sometimes doctored up with a squirt of ketchup, a splash of Worcestershire, or even a little mustard to cut the sweetness. Dinner was on the table, or more often on the TV trays, within 15 minutes, and everyone was happy. Culturally, this dish fit the mood of the era. The 1950s were all about efficiency and convenience, and few meals embodied that better. It was kid-friendly, affordable, and portable, which made it perfect for evenings spent laughing at the Jack Benny show. For many, the combination is still a taste of childhood summers, backyard barbecues, and the comforting hum of a black and white television in the background. Today, foodies might dismiss it as lowbrow, but back then, hot dogs and baked beans were proof that dinner didn't need to be complicated to feel complete. It just needed to fill the belly and fit the moment. And for all its simplicity, the meal could be surprisingly versatile. Some families would slice the hot dogs right into the beans, letting the salty meat mingle with the sweet sauce. Others would pile the beans on buttered toast, topping it with a hot dog for what was essentially a homemade diner plate. In church cookbooks and PTA pamphlets, variations popped up with names like Beanie Weenies or Franks and Beans, proving that this humble pairing had become a national staple. Parents liked it because it stretched $1. Kids liked it because it felt like a treat. Looking back, it was more than dinner. It was an edible snapshot of a time when convenience ruled, family was central, and a simple plate of beans and Franks could bring everyone together in front of the TV. Macaroni and cheese.
My all-time favorite recipes in our cookbook, a baked mac and cheese.
In the 1950s, macaroni and cheese wasn't just dinner. It was the edible definition of comfort. By this time, Kraft's boxed macaroni and cheese, introduced during the Depression, had become a kitchen staple, promising a hot meal in mere minutes, with nothing more than a saucepan, a packet of powdered cheese, and a splash of milk. For busy families, juggling the new rhythms of suburban life, commutes, school activities, and, of course, evening television, this bright orange pasta dish was a godsend. It was cheap, it was fast, and most importantly, it was adored by children, who never seemed to tire of its creamy, slightly tangy flavor. Homemade versions still held a place on the table, especially in households that leaned on butter, milk, and a brick of sharp cheddar for something more filling. These baked renditions often emerged bubbling and golden, crowned with breadcrumbs for crunch. But whether it came from an oven or a blue box, macaroni and cheese was pure comfort food, a reliable dish that asked little and gave much. Parents loved that it could be stretched easily. Hot dogs sliced into the pot, peas folded in for color, or leftovers served alongside meatloaf for a full meal. Emotionally, mac and cheese carried the aura of warmth and security. Its smell, drifting from the kitchen, promised a familiar, dependable dinner after long days of school or work. Served in TV trays, it was often shoveled in quickly before giggles took over at the antics of Lucille Ball or Red Skelton. Today, chefs elevate it with truffle oil, lobster, or artisan cheeses, but its heart remains unchanged. The 1950s version didn't need all that. It was about simple noodles, a creamy sauce, and the joy of a meal that let families focus less on the kitchen and more on each other. Sloppy Joes.
Showing you how to make the best homemade sloppy joes.
Few meals capture the cheerful messiness of 1950s family life quite like the Sloppy Joe. Born from the frugal creativity of mixing ground beef with a tangy tomato-based sauce, this sandwich was a weeknight miracle. Quick to make, cheap to stretch, and beloved by kids who delighted in its name as much as its taste. While its true origin is debated, some credit a cook named Joe in Sioux City, Iowa, the dish had firmly entered the national rotation by the post-war years. In an era when television sets dominated living rooms, the Sloppy Joe was the perfect handheld dinner for the glowing light of the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. The preparation was so simple it could almost be done blindfolded. A skillet of sizzling ground beef was seasoned with onions, ketchup or tomato paste, and a splash of Worcestershire for depth. Some home cooks added green peppers, others a dash of vinegar or brown sugar to strike that magical balance of sweet and savory. Spoon the mixture onto soft hamburger buns, and dinner was served in under 20 minutes. Of course, the filling had a habit of sliding out the sides, dripping onto plates, laps, and sometimes the carpet, but that was part of the charm. Sloppy Joes weren't meant to be tidy, they were meant to be fun. Culturally, the Sloppy Joe mirrored the decade's appetite for informality. It wasn't a knife and fork meal, nor was it elegant. but it carried a playful spirit that resonated with children and gave parents a breather from fussier dishes. Today, it still makes appearances at school cafeterias and potlucks, often mocked as mess hall food, but its nostalgic pull is undeniable. In the 1950s, a sloppy Joe on a TV tray was more than dinner. It was a delicious license to loosen up, laugh, and embrace the chaos. Chicken a la king.
I'm showing you how to make chicken a la king.
Chicken a la king carried a certain flair into the 1950s living room, a dish that once belonged to hotel dining rooms and ladies' luncheons, but soon found its way into the TV tray era. Its origins stretch back to the late 19th or early 20th century, depending on which story you believe. Some say it was created at New York's Brighton Beach Hotel, others at the Waldorf. By mid-century, however, it was no longer the exclusive property of white tablecloth restaurants. Instead, it was reimagined as a family-friendly dinner that could be ladled over toast points, biscuits, or rice, and eaten while watching The Ed Sullivan Show. At its core, Chicken a la King was about luxury made accessible. Diced chicken breast, often leftovers from Sunday's roast, sautéed mushrooms, and pimientos swam in a creamy, sherry-kissed sauce thickened with butter and flour. In the 1950s, shortcuts abounded. Canned mushrooms replaced fresh, jarred pimientos stood in for careful roasting, and the cream sauce could be hastily whisked together with evaporated milk. It was elegance pared down, a meal that suggested sophistication while still leaning heavily on convenience. Families loved it because it struck a balance between frugality and glamour. For mothers who wanted to serve something special without breaking the budget, Chicken a la King was a ticket to culinary prestige, at least in the eyes of the neighborhood bridge club. For kids, it was creamy, savory comfort food that felt indulgent without being fussy. Today, Chicken a la King rarely graces the table, dismissed as dated or overly rich. Yet in its prime, it was a bridge between old-world formality and modern ease. Eating it from a tray in front of the TV, one could feel both fancy and relaxed, a little taste of luxury delivered in creamy spoonfuls. Chop suey. In the 1950s, chop suey was the height of exotic dining in suburban America, though by then it had already been Americanized beyond recognition from its Chinese roots.
Chop suey is typical of the Chinese way of cooking.
The dish had actually been popular since the early 20th century, when Chinese immigrants adapted stir-fry techniques to the ingredients they could find in the United States. By mid-century, chop suey had become a household name not just in restaurants, but in kitchens, where cans of bean sprouts, water chestnuts, and soy sauce offered a shortcut to international flavor. For families eager to feel adventurous without leaving their comfort zone, this saucy stir-fry of vegetables and meat was a safe ticket abroad. Served, of course, on a TV tray in front of Dragnet. The beauty of chop suey in the 1950s lay in its adaptability. Ground beef, chicken, or pork could be stretched with cabbage, celery, onions, and those novelty canned sprouts. Everything simmered in a thickened sauce of soy and cornstarch until it was glossy and savory, then spooned over rice or noodles. For homemakers, it was a way to use up odds and ends from the refrigerator while still delivering something that felt like a change of pace from the usual meat and potatoes routine. Emotionally, chop suey symbolized both curiosity and caution. It gave suburban families the thrill of eating something foreign, while still keeping flavors mild and textures familiar. Many children of the era remember their first bite of chop suey as their introduction to Asian cuisine, however diluted it may have been. What made chop suey so appealing wasn't just the novelty, but the practicality. Canned goods gave it a year-round reliability, and the dish could easily scale up for big families or stretch leftovers into another meal. Some homemakers even leaned on recipes clipped from Better Homes and Gardens or passed around in church cookbooks, all promising to bring a dash of the Orient to the family table without frightening picky eaters. Served with crispy chow mein noodles from a can, it became both dinner and entertainment, something a little different for the same old TV hour. Today, food historians might smirk at its inauthenticity, but in the 1950s, chop suey was a bridge to a wider world. It was proof that even in a decade of conformity, American kitchens were open to new ideas, just not too new. It was adventure served safely in a casserole dish, a compromise between the comfort of home and the promise of faraway flavors. Spaghetti with meat sauce.
I'm gonna show you how to make my favorite spaghetti meat sauce.
By the 1950s, spaghetti with meat sauce had become a staple of the American dinner table, though it bore only a passing resemblance to its Italian origins. Immigrant families had introduced pasta to the United States decades earlier, but post-war suburban households adapted it into something quick, hearty, and easy to prepare with the help of canned tomato products. A pot of noodles paired with ground beef simmered in tomato paste or jarred sauce could feed a crowd for pennies, and in a decade when convenience reigned supreme, spaghetti night became both practical and popular. Preparation usually started with boiling a box of dried spaghetti until tender, while ground beef sizzled in a skillet with onions and garlic. A can of tomato paste, sometimes diluted with water, or a tin of stewed tomatoes, transformed the meat into a rich, if slightly acidic sauce. For flavor, home cooks leaned on oregano, basil, or a shake of Italian seasoning from the spice rack. Though more often than not, it was a squirt of ketchup or a pinch of sugar that balanced things out. Served with a canister of grated Parmesan, the kind that resembled powdered snow, this version of spaghetti was comfort food through and through. For families, spaghetti with meat sauce carried both practicality and a touch of cosmopolitan flair. It wasn't just meat and potatoes. It was a taste of Europe, simplified for the American palate. Children twirled noodles while parents relaxed in front of the black and white glow of the Donna Reed show. There was a communal joy in passing the bowl, sauce splatters and all. Spaghetti night also fit neatly into the rhythm of 1950s life. It was inexpensive enough to appear weekly on the menu, yet filling enough to fuel growing kids and hard-working parents. Leftovers reheated beautifully, making it one of the rare meals that stretched into lunches the next day. Some families even made the ritual fancier by adding garlic bread, made from nothing more than margarine, dried garlic powder, and soft white bread toasted under the broiler. Or a simple iceberg lettuce salad, drenched in bottled French dressing. Suddenly, dinner felt like an event, even if the only entertainment was Lucy and Ricky's antics. Culturally, spaghetti with meat sauce was part of America's flirtation with the international cuisine. It offered just enough novelty without stepping too far outside the comfort zone. It was still meat-based, still hearty, but it carried a whiff of sophistication. The idea that families in suburbia could eat like Italians, at least their imagined version of Italians, without leaving their living rooms. Today, authentic pasta dishes might be celebrated with artisanal cheeses and slow-simmered sauces, but there's still a nostalgic charm to that 1950s spaghetti dinner. It reminds us of a time when canned tomatoes and powdered Parmesan felt like luxury, when a box of pasta could bring a family together, and when even the simplest meal could feel like a small trip abroad, TV tray included. Deviled ham sandwiches. In the 1950s, deviled ham sandwiches were the kind of quick-fix meal that kept families fed without fuss, a reminder that not every dinner had to be glamorous to be satisfying. The key ingredient, of course, was that little paper-wrapped can of Underwood deviled ham, decorated with its impish red devil mascot. Introduced decades earlier, it hit peak popularity in mid-century America when convenience foods ruled the pantry. A can of deviled ham could be turned into sandwiches in less time than it took the TV to warm up, which made it perfect for weeknights when parents wanted to spend less time at the stove and more time in front of the Ed Sullivan Show. The preparation was as easy as opening a can and spreading the savory, spiced paste onto slices of soft white bread. Some homemakers stretched it by mixing in mayonnaise, mustard, or chopped pickles for extra tang. Others used it as a filling for crustless finger sandwiches, though in most suburban households it was slapped between bread, maybe with a leaf of iceberg lettuce, and handed out on TV trays without ceremony. Pair it with potato chips or a dill pickle spear, and you had a meal that was salty, filling, and surprisingly satisfying given its humble origins. Emotionally, deviled ham sandwiches embodied the practicality of the era. They weren't fancy, but they delivered exactly what busy families needed: fuel, comfort, and a little novelty. Children may not have known or cared what deviled meant, but they recognized the devil logo and associated it with a treat that felt a bit mischievous. Today, the idea of canned ham spread might raise eyebrows, but for mid-century households, it was a pantry hero. It proved that in the glow of the TV, dinner didn't need to be elegant, it just needed to be ready fast. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. If the 1950s had a culinary mascot for childhood, it might well have been the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. By then, peanut butter had long since moved from novelty to necessity, fortified by its role in feeding soldiers during World War II, and cemented in lunchboxes across the nation. Pair it with a smear of sweet jewel-toned jelly and 2 slices of soft white bread, and you had a meal that was cheap, quick, and universally adored. Families embraced PB&J not only at lunchtime, but often as an easy weeknight supper, perfect for eating off a TV tray while laughing along with Leave It to Beaver. Preparation couldn't have been simpler, which was part of its magic. Spread peanut butter, smooth or crunchy, though smooth ruled the decade, on one slice, jelly on the other, pressed together, and voila, dinner was served in under a minute. Parents appreciated that it was filling and required no cooking, no oven, no cleanup beyond a butter knife. Children loved it because it was theirs, a meal sized to their tastes, rather than dictated by adult notions of meat and potatoes. Some families added banana slices or honey for variety, but the basic formula was so enduring, it rarely needed embellishment. Culturally, the peanut butter and jelly sandwich was a symbol of American abundance and ingenuity. It was a meal built entirely from processed supermarket staples, the kind of items always on hand in a post-war pantry. It represented thrift without feeling stingy, comfort without ceremony. Today, PB&J is often dismissed as kid food, a quick snack rather than dinner. But in the 1950s, it was a reliable solution for busy families. Sitting cross-legged in front of the television, sandwich in hand, children tasted not just sweetness, but the easygoing promise of mid-century domestic life. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Few pairings evoke the coziness of mid-century America quite like grilled cheese and tomato soup. By the 1950s, this simple duo had already become a classic, a warm hug of a meal that was both budget-friendly and endlessly comforting. Kraft Singles, launched in 1949, made grilled cheese easier than ever, with perfectly uniform slices that melted into gooey submission between 2 pieces of white bread. Add a swipe of butter on the outside, toast it to golden perfection in a skillet, and you had a sandwich that crackled and oozed with every bite. Paired with a steaming bowl of Campbell's tomato soup, just add water or milk, it became the quintessential TV tray supper. The preparation was foolproof, which was exactly why families leaned on it so often. The sandwich required little more than bread, butter, and cheese, while the soup came straight from a red and white can, heating in a saucepan as commercials played in the background. Together, they created a balance of flavors, the rich, salty meltiness of the grilled cheese against the tangy, sweet smoothness of the tomato soup. For children, dunking a crispy triangle into the warm, red broth was half the fun. turning dinner into a small act of play. Emotionally, this pairing spoke to the era's craving for simplicity and security. After the upheavals of war, families found reassurance in meals that were easy, familiar, and comforting. The combination was inexpensive enough to fit tight budgets, yet satisfying enough to feel complete. Today, chefs dress it up with artisan sourdough and heirloom tomato bisque, but the soul of the dish remains unchanged. In the 1950s, grilled cheese and tomato soup weren't just food. They were the taste of safety, warmth, and togetherness, best enjoyed while the television flickered softly in the corner. Fish sticks with tartar sauce. In the 1950s, fish sticks swam their way into the American kitchen and quickly became a dinnertime hero. Before then, fish was often considered fussy, something you bought fresh at the market, cooked the same day, and usually reserved for Fridays if you were Catholic. But then came the frozen food revolution, and suddenly fillets of white fish, breaded and pre-cooked, could be pulled from the freezer and baked to golden crispness with no bones, no smell, and no hassle. For families juggling homework, chores, and the nightly television lineup, fish sticks were the perfect compromise between nutrition and convenience. The preparation was delightfully hands-off. Mothers slid the frozen sticks onto a baking sheet and let the oven do the rest. While they crisped, a quick tartar sauce could be stirred together from mayonnaise, relish, and maybe a splash of lemon juice. If that felt too fancy, a bottle of ketchup usually stood in. Dinner was ready in under half an hour, with little more effort than tearing open a box. Served alongside peas or French fries, fish sticks were one of the rare ways parents could get kids to eat seafood without a fight. After all, what child could resist dunking crunchy, finger-sized food into a creamy sauce? Beyond practicality, fish sticks carried the optimism of modern living. They were a marvel of food science, the result of improved freezing methods and mass production that promised quality year-round. In a decade obsessed with innovation, from space travel to color television, the idea that dinner could be pulled from the freezer and taste good felt downright futuristic. Parents took pride in serving them, not as a shortcut, but as proof that their household was keeping up with the times. For kids, fish sticks were pure fun. They looked and ate more like snacks than a serious dinner, and the ritual of dipping them into tartar sauce or ketchup gave mealtime a playful, hands-on element. Even picky eaters, who might have turned up their noses at a whole fillet of fish, eagerly polished off a plate of these golden batons. They weren't intimidating. They were approachable, tailor-made for TV trays and commercial breaks. Culturally, fish sticks reflected the 1950s dream of uniformity and order. Every stick looked the same, every bite tasted the same, and that consistency was comforting in an age that prized predictability. While today's diners might crave variety and freshness, mid-century families valued reliability and ease. Fish sticks provided both, and they carried just enough of a healthy reputation to keep mothers feeling virtuous. Today, they may linger in the freezer aisle as a humble standby, but in their golden age, fish sticks were a revolution on a plate. They represented a moment when technology, family life, and mealtime pleasure converged, when the future of dinner was square, breaded, and ready in 20 minutes. Hamburger hot dish. If the 1950s had a culinary emblem for practicality and thrift, it was the hamburger hot dish. Particularly beloved in the Midwest, this all-in-one casserole was the ultimate way to stretch a pound of ground beef into something that could feed a hungry family of 5. In an era when convenience was king, but budget still mattered, hot dish was the answer. It was simple, hearty, and endlessly adaptable, perfect for serving on those folding TV trays while the family tuned in to Father Knows Best. Preparation usually started with browning ground beef in a skillet, often with chopped onions for flavor. From there, the rules loosened considerably. Some families mixed the meat with canned tomato soup, others with cream of mushroom or cream of celery. A bag of frozen vegetables or a can of corn often joined the party, all poured into a casserole dish and topped with noodles, potatoes, or sometimes a scattering of breadcrumbs or cheese. Then it baked until bubbly, sending savory aromas through the house that promised comfort in every bite. The beauty of the hamburger hot dish was that it didn't require a recipe so much as a little creativity with whatever was on hand. Culturally, the dish reflected the heart of 1950s cooking: resourceful, filling, and family-centered. It wasn't fancy. No one would mistake it for haute cuisine. But it was reliable, and that reliability mattered in a decade striving for stability. Kids loved the gooey textures and mild flavors, while parents loved the efficiency. Today, the hamburger hot dish is often remembered with a mix of nostalgia and gentle ribbing, filed under church basement classics. Yet its staying power speaks volumes. In the 50s, it wasn't just dinner. It was a warm, bubbling promise that nothing in the fridge would ever go to waste. Corn dogs. By the 1950s, corn dogs had made the leap from state fair novelty to family favorite, bringing a taste of carnival fun right into the living room. The concept was as delightfully simple as it was ingenious: a hot dog on a stick, dipped in cornmeal batter, and fried until golden and crisp. First popularized at fairs and drive-ins in the 1940s, corn dogs became part of the mid-century food landscape, just as televisions became household fixtures. For families gathered around the Mickey Mouse Club, corn dogs offered the thrill of eating something whimsical and handheld, dinner disguised as a treat. Preparation at home was easier than it looked, especially once frozen versions began appearing in supermarkets. Mothers could buy a box, slide the battered dogs into the oven, and in minutes have a batch ready to serve. Homemade versions, though rarer, were a badge of pride, mixing cornmeal batter, skewering hot dogs, and frying them in bubbling oil until the coating puffed up and crackled. Either way, they were dunked into ketchup or mustard and eaten straight from the stick. No forks or knives required. For kids, the appeal was obvious: portable, crunchy on the outside, savory on the inside, and just messy enough to feel like mischief. Emotionally, corn dogs carried a sense of play that fit perfectly with the optimism of the decade. They blurred the line between snack and supper, evoking memories of fairs, parades, and summertime freedom, even in the middle of a weekday evening. Parents appreciated their affordability and ease, while children simply delighted in the novelty. Today, corn dogs are still a midway staple and a frozen food aisle standby. But in the 1950s, biting into one at home felt like a small celebration. It was joy on a stick, perfectly suited to the glow of the TV screen. Scalloped potatoes with ham. If there was ever a dish that embodied the phrase, "waste not, want not," in the 1950s, it was scalloped potatoes with ham. Families who splurged on a Sunday ham rarely let the leftovers go to waste, and this casserole was the perfect solution for turning scraps into a meal hearty enough to feed the whole household. It combined the frugality of Depression-era thinking with the casserole craze of the post-war years, where layering, baking, and stretching ingredients became an art form. At its core, the dish was simple: thinly sliced potatoes layered in a casserole dish, dotted with cubes of leftover ham, and blanketed in a creamy sauce, usually a quick bechamel made from milk, butter, and flour, sometimes with a bit of grated cheese. The layers built up like edible strata, each slice of potato soaking in the richness of the sauce as it baked. By the time it emerged from the oven, the top was golden and bubbling, the edges crisp, and the inside tender and savory. For many families, it was a one-dish wonder, filling, comforting, and thrifty, the kind of dinner that went hand in hand with folding TV trays and black and white sitcoms. There was also something emotionally grounding about scalloped potatoes with ham. It was a second-day dish, one that symbolized continuity, making sure nothing went to waste while still providing a meal that felt abundant. Kids rarely complained since the creamy potatoes softened the salty edge of the ham, creating a balanced comfort food that appealed across generations. Today, it might not seem glamorous compared to modern dining trends, but its heart is in the right place. In the 1950s, scalloped potatoes with ham weren't just leftovers reinvented. They were a reminder that practicality could still taste like love baked into every layer. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Creamed chipped beef on toast may not win awards for glamour, but in the 1950s, it was a weeknight standby that married convenience with comfort, known affectionately or not so affectionately depending on who you asked, as SOS. In military slang, this dish had already earned its stripes in Army mess halls before marching straight into American kitchens. For veterans returning from World War II, the sight of creamed chipped beef ladled over toast was familiar, filling, and oddly reassuring. It was a dish born of necessity, but carried into peacetime as a no-fuss way to get dinner on the table. The preparation couldn't have been simpler. Dried beef, often sold in glass jars or vacuum-packed, was chopped into ribbons and simmered in a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. The sauce thickened into a creamy gravy that softened the salty beef and made it stretch further. Ladled over toasted white bread, it transformed into a stick-to-your-ribs meal that cost little and filled plenty. Some families added a touch of pepper or a sprinkle of parsley, but for the most part, this was a dish that thrived on its minimalism. Its emotional weight was complicated, nostalgic for some, dreaded for others. Children might wrinkle their noses at the salty, creamy pile in their plate, while parents appreciated its affordability and speed. For war veterans, it carried echoes of mess hall memories, though in the softer glow of the television set, it became less about rations and more about routine. Today, creamed chipped beef on toast is often remembered with a wink and a groan, a dish equal parts comfort and kitsch. But in the 1950s, it was part of the rhythm of American life, simple, economical, and just hearty enough to fuel another evening in front of the flickering TV screen. Jell-O salads. Few dishes capture the quirk and charm of 1950s dining quite like the infamous Jell-O salad. At the height of its popularity, gelatin was more than dessert. It was a canvas for creativity, a shimmering stage where fruit, vegetables, and even meats could be suspended in translucent glory. Housewives clipped recipes from magazines promising elegance and novelty, and company dinners often featured a wobbly centerpiece that sparkled under the dining room light. What began as a symbol of modern convenience thanks to the wonders of instant gelatin quickly became a staple on the American family table. The building blocks were deceptively simple: a box of flavored Jell-O, hot water, and whatever mix-ins the cook had on hand. Sweet versions might contain canned pineapple, mandarin oranges, or miniature marshmallows, while the more adventurous, savory takes included shredded carrots, cabbage, or even cubes of ham. Molded into rings, towers, or floral shapes, Jell-O salads look like culinary sculpture, often presented proudly at potlucks or perched next to the meatloaf on a TV tray. The allure wasn't just taste, but spectacle. Nothing said modern homemaker quite like a neon green mold holding together an improbable collection of ingredients. For children, Jell-O salads were often a delight, the jiggle itself as entertaining as the flavor. For adults, they represented efficiency and resourcefulness. Canned goods, leftovers, and produce could all be stretched and repackaged into something new. Yet nostalgia today often paints them with a mix of affection and disbelief. Modern eaters might shudder at the thought of lime gelatin studded with shredded celery, but in the 1950s, it was innovation on a plate. Jell-O salads endure in memory because they embody the optimism and eccentricity of mid-century cooking. Colorful, practical, a little bizarre, and forever tied to the era of black and white television dinners. chicken and rice casserole. Chicken and rice casserole was one of those quintessential 1950s comfort meals that seemed to show up everywhere on Sunday dinner tables, at church potlucks, and especially on weeknights when a busy parent needed something hearty and reliable. The magic of this dish lay in its simplicity. Just a few inexpensive ingredients baked together into a creamy, filling casserole that could feed a hungry family without much fuss. In an era when convenience foods were steadily finding their way into American kitchens, chicken and rice casserole became a bridge between scratch cooking and modern shortcuts. The foundation was straightforward: cooked chicken, often left over from a Sunday roast or a store-bought fryer, mixed with white rice, cream of mushroom or cream of chicken soup, and sometimes a splash of milk for extra creaminess. Everything was poured into a trusty Pyrex dish, topped with a scattering of breadcrumbs or shredded cheese, and slid into the oven until bubbling and golden. Some families stirred in peas or celery for color and crunch, while others kept it plain and comforting, a dish that tasted like warmth itself. For many children of the 1950s, this casserole meant security. It was filling, soft, and familiar. Parents, on the other hand, loved that it could be assembled quickly, stretched to feed multiple mouths, and repurposed for leftovers the next day. It was economical, but also adaptable, a recipe that welcomed substitutions depending on what the pantry offered. Today, chicken and rice casserole still makes appearances in nostalgic cookbooks and retro food blogs, though modern versions often swap in brown rice, fresh vegetables, or homemade sauces. Still, the essence remains unchanged. In the glow of the television screen or around the family table, it was the kind of dish that didn't just feed stomachs. It fed memories, one creamy bite at a time. Icebox cake. The icebox cake was one of those genius mid-century inventions that made dessert feel both glamorous and effortless, a perfect reflection of 1950s ingenuity in the kitchen. At a time when refrigeration was still something to show off, the very name icebox cake carried a modern ring, promising a chilled treat that required no oven and very little labor. It was the dessert of choice for the busy homemaker who wanted to impress guests without breaking a sweat. And for children, it often meant sneaking peeks into the refrigerator to watch the magic unfold. At its core, the icebox cake was built on layers: crisp chocolate wafer cookies or graham crackers alternated with clouds of whipped cream. As the cake rested overnight in the refrigerator, the cookies absorbed the cream and softened into a tender, cake-like texture, transforming the simplest of ingredients into something decadent. Variations abounded. Some cooks added canned fruit between layers, others topped it with chocolate shavings or drizzled fudge, and in especially festive households, you might find stripes of strawberry gelatin folded in. The result was always the same: a cool, creamy, sliceable dessert that tasted far fancier than the effort it required. What made the icebox cake so beloved wasn't just its flavor, but its sense of occasion. Pulling one from the refrigerator, unveiling it on a platter, and slicing through its tidy layers had a touch of drama. It was a dessert that carried the charm of modern living, yet it was forgiving enough for even the most inexperienced cook. Today, the icebox cake lives on as a retro classic, resurfacing in food blogs and TikTok tutorials, where younger generations marvel at its simplicity. In a world of elaborate pastries, it reminds us that sometimes the sweetest indulgence comes from patience, cream, and a stack of cookies. Banana pudding with Nilla wafers. Few desserts embody the heart of mid-century American comfort like banana pudding layered with Nilla wafers. It was a dish that spoke of hospitality and hominess, a simple yet impressive treat that found its way onto church supper tables, family reunions, and weeknight dinners when a little sweetness was in order. In the 1950s, when pre-packaged foods promised both modern convenience and a sense of reliability, The pairing of boxed vanilla wafers with instant pudding and fresh bananas became a match made in kitchen heaven. The process was almost ceremonial. A layer of cookies at the bottom of a glass dish, slices of ripe banana laid gently over them, followed by a generous ladle of pudding, traditionally vanilla, though ambitious cooks sometimes went with banana-flavored. Then the layers were repeated until the dish was full, crowned with a final flourish of whipped cream, or, for the traditionalists, a billowy topping of meringue that was baked just until kissed with golden peaks. The magic of the dessert came not only from the flavor, but from the transformation that took place overnight. The crisp wafers softened into cake-like pillows, melding with the pudding and fruit into a texture that felt like a hug on a spoon. Children adored it for its sweetness and fun layers, while adults cherished it for its nostalgia and ease. It was a dessert that could stretch a handful of bananas and a box of cookies into something that felt celebratory. And of course, every family swore their version was the best, some insisting on warm from the oven, others chilled straight from the refrigerator. Even today, banana pudding with Nilla wafers holds its charm. It's a dish that transcends generations, a reminder that the best desserts don't have to be fancy, they just have to taste like home. Root beer floats. If ever there was a dessert that captured the spirit of carefree summer nights and sock hop Americana, it was the root beer float. Known in some circles as a black cow, this bubbly concoction of soda and ice cream was less about culinary sophistication and more about pure fizzy joy. In the 1950s, when soda fountains were still the social hubs for teenagers and families alike, the float was an edible symbol of leisure, the kind of treat that could turn an ordinary evening into a celebration. The magic was in its simplicity: a tall, frosty glass, 2 generous scoops of vanilla ice cream, and a steady pour of root beer that fizzed and foamed like a science experiment gone deliciously right. The first sip was always through a straw, a mixture of creamy foam and icy soda, followed by the inevitable spoon digging to chase down the melting ice cream. There were no complicated recipes, no lengthy prep work, just a collision of pantry staples that somehow felt like an event. Part of the charm came from its adaptability. Kids could slurp it down at the local drive-in while watching a movie from the back seat of the family station wagon, while adults might sneak one as a guilty pleasure after the kids had gone to bed. For households where dessert usually meant Jell-O or canned fruit cocktail, the float felt almost decadent, a miniature holiday in a glass. Today, root beer floats carry the glow of nostalgia, a reminder of when a quarter and a soda fountain counter were all you needed for happiness. While craft sodas and artisanal ice creams have tried to gussy it up, the truth is the float doesn't need improving. It's still best enjoyed the old-fashioned way: cold glass, creamy scoop, fizzy pour, and a smile. Rice pudding. Rice pudding is one of those humble desserts that manages to feel both frugal and indulgent at the same time. In the 1950s, when resourcefulness still shaped much of home cooking, it was the perfect way to turn leftover rice into something comforting and sweet. Families who were mindful not to waste a thing could take yesterday's dinner side and, with a little milk, sugar, and patience, transform it into a dish that tasted like a reward. It was a lesson in thriftiness wrapped in cinnamon and nutmeg. The preparation was simple, which only added to its charm. Rice was simmered slowly with milk until it swelled and softened, then sweetened with sugar and enriched with a touch of butter or cream. Some cooks added beaten eggs for extra richness, creating a custard-like texture, while others preferred it more porridge-like, loose and spoonable. The crowning touch was always the spice: cinnamon and nutmeg dusted generously over the top, sometimes with a handful of raisins folded in, which children either loved or picked out with suspicion. Served warm straight from the pot or chilled from the icebox, it adapted to the season and the mood of the table. What gave rice pudding its staying power wasn't just flavor, but its associations. It was the kind of dessert a grandmother would make while humming in the kitchen, a dish that tasted of patience and practicality. It reminded families that treats didn't need to be store-bought or extravagant to feel special. In many homes, it doubled as breakfast the next day, proving its versatility. Even now, rice pudding carries that air of quiet nostalgia. In a world obsessed with elaborate cakes and flashy desserts, it remains a steady reminder that comfort often comes from the simplest bowls, filled with sweetness born of thrift. Marshmallow Fluff Sandwich. If the 1950s had a poster child for unapologetic childhood indulgence, it was the marshmallow fluff sandwich. Unlike the stalwart peanut butter and jelly, which at least pretended to offer a balance of protein and fruit, this concoction was a sugar bomb from start to finish, and that was precisely the point. Spread thick between two slices of soft white bread, Fluff turned an ordinary school lunch or after-school snack into something bordering on magical, especially for kids who lived in a time when candy was still considered an occasional treat rather than a daily habit. The preparation couldn't have been easier. Mothers, or more often children themselves, simply twisted open a jar of marshmallow fluff, a sticky, glossy white confection that clung to the spoon like a playful dare. Smoothed across bread, sometimes paired with peanut butter for what New Englanders famously dubbed the fluffernutter, it created a sandwich that required 2 hands and a tolerance for sticky fingers. The fluff's texture was somewhere between frosting and taffy, so each bite straddled the line between snack and dessert. But beyond its sugar rush appeal, the marshmallow fluff sandwich held a cultural place in mid-century America. It represented fun in an era still marked by thriftiness. Families that had lived through the Depression and wartime rationing understood the value of frugality, but by the 1950s, there was room for whimsy, and fluff fit the bill. It was inexpensive, shelf-stable, and endlessly entertaining to spread, stretch, and smear. Today, nostalgia has elevated the fluff sandwich to near legendary status. It's a reminder of brown paper lunch bags, recess chatter, and the thrill of opening a sandwich that was less about nutrition and more about delight. In a food culture obsessed with wellness and balance, the fluff sandwich remains a glorious ode to carefree sweetness. Canned ravioli. Canned ravioli may not sound glamorous, but for families in the 1950s, it was a small miracle in a can. Here was Italian food, Italian-American food, delivered straight from the pantry shelf, ready to eat after just a few minutes on the stovetop. In an era when convenience was rapidly reshaping the way Americans ate, canned ravioli fit right in. It required no rolling of dough, no stuffing of pasta, and no simmering sauce that bubbled away for hours. Instead, with the reassuring crack of a can opener, dinner was practically done. The ravioli itself was soft, pillowy pasta squares filled with a mildly seasoned meat mixture and swimming in a tomato sauce that leaned more sweet than savory. To a child perched on the couch in front of the family's black and white television, it was perfection. The sauce was just tangy enough to be interesting, but mild enough not to scare picky eaters. And the pasta, though sometimes a little mushy, had the comforting quality of food designed to be easy. Many kids remember eating it straight from the pot with a spoon, too impatient to wait for it to be ladled neatly onto plates. Its appeal went beyond flavor. Canned ravioli was affordable, easy to stock in bulk, and gave parents a quick solution on busy nights when work, school, and chores crowded out the time for scratch cooking. It became a staple of bachelor apartments, college dorms, and lunch boxes, its red and white labels promising familiarity. Even today, canned ravioli hasn't disappeared. It might not rival fresh pasta at an Italian trattoria, but it holds a special place in the memory of mid-century kitchens. For many, it's the taste of childhood, warm, simple, and proof that sometimes a can opener was as powerful as a rolling pin. And there you have it, 30 meals that defined couch-side dining in the glow of the family television set. From casseroles bubbling in Pyrex to sweet treats that never made it to the table, these dishes were more than food. They were part of the rhythm of American life in the 1950s. If this trip down memory lane made you hungry or nostalgic, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this with someone who remembers. And subscribe for more stories of the meals that shaped our past.